Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers, sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings upon you all. And welcome to this series of recordings that we will, inshallah, use as a platform to discuss issues and various dimensions of life, always from the perspective of Islam. And of course, included in there, we also want to make sure that we get to know the important figures that are influential and that play a key role in our communities. So today we are in the presence of such a figure. We have the fortune of being in the presence of His Eminence Shaikh Vinay Khetia. Shaykhna, Assalamu alaikum
wa alaikum salam wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So I will start by giving the very quick bio that we have of you here. And we will start from there as for the beginning of the discussion that we have. Shaykh Vinay studied in several Islamic seminars, including the Hawza Ilmiya of London, Hawzat al-Qa'im in Syria, Hawza Ilmiya of Najaf, specializing in Islamic law and manuscripts under the guidance of Samahat Sayyid Mustafa Sadr and Shaykh Hassan al-Muballigh, as well as attending directed studies under Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi or Muhammad al-Radawi and Sayyid Hussein al-Husayni al-Jalali. He has also obtained traditional teaching licenses or ijazat in hadith from several scholars, including Grand Ayatollah Sheikh Nasr Makaram Shirazi. And in addition to all of this, Shaykh Vinay, in addition to the traditional Islamic studies, he also has obtained a master's in history and philosophy of religion from Concordia University and a PhD in religious studies from McMaster University. So Shaykh Vinay, in addition to all of this, also currently holds the title of Director of Religious Affairs in As-Sadiq Islamic School in Toronto. So Shaykhna, so that I do not, impose and put words myself into reading into this journey, I actually went through the autobiographical notes that you have on your site. And in there, you at some point say, my journey to Islam began in 2001 with a trip to Dubai in which I was first exposed to Islamic culture. Upon hindsight, I am not sure if such a thing really exists or can be labeled as Islamic. And you continue with that. So I had a few questions around that one sentence. The first one is when you say, my journey to Islam began. So the first question is simply, can you tell us a little bit about that journey? And obviously leading to you deciding to become not only a Muslim, but also a scholar of Islam. Yeah, so all yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for the overinflated introduction. Just as a note, I'm currently preparing for my doctoral defense. So inshallah, the PhD will be done in the next few months, inshallah. As for going to Dubai, I was 17 years old at the time and coming obviously from a completely Western background, right? Brought up in Toronto. And then all of a sudden, being exposed to these abayas and niqabs and adhan and masajid. And it was so mystifying, I would say, and bewildering, but not in a bad way, in a curious way, because I had never seen really religious people expose their religion in public. For me, growing up, religion was always as important, but a very private matter. And people are walking around with their religion wherever they go as a piece of clothing. The religion now becomes a piece of clothing, as per se, or at least a manifestation of that religion in a piece of clothing, and the sounds that you hear, the sights. It was a very interesting experience as a young man, and that kind of sparked an interest in, in what we would call Islamic culture, or what Marshall Hodgson would call Islamicate culture, right? So depends how you want to define that word, right? So yeah.
And so to you, that was that already enough for you to know that you are going to be studying Islam and both? I mean, and I wanted to come to that specifically a little bit later, but both academically and from a traditional Islamic studies perspective. When did that happen? Or was there already a spark that you knew you were going to be spending a lot of time studying and understanding this religion you've been just exposed to?
It's a good question. I wouldn't say I had thought of that when I was 17, but I definitely became extremely curious about it. But not curious in the way of wanting to become a Muslim. Curious in the way of, wow, this is a really interesting culture. And I'm really amazed by it, especially the recitation of the Quran and the recitation of the book and the emotion by which it's recited and the role that it plays in people's lives. You know, the at least what I perceive to be the ubiquitous nature of the Quran on radio, on the TV, you know, hearing it in cabs, hearing it at different places, it's on the plane. There's something very important about this book to people, right?
Yes.
And it's recited in a very, prosaic manner. Need I say musical? At the time, I would maybe describe it as being musical. Of course, Muslims would not describe it as being musical, but a non-Muslim would say it's musical.
Of course.
Because it's moving, right? Because of the change,
melody.
Because of the melody, the change in the tone, right? The rhyming, it's described as a form of music. Of course, we won't describe it as a form of music, of course, because what's defined as music is not necessarily, that.
Yes.
But I was just amazed by it, and then 9/11 happened. As soon as I returned, we had 9/11. And the tragedy, and we knew a few people that were there, and it was very moving, and I was kind of conflicted then, right? Which is like, what is going on? Why is there so much violence? What is going on in the world? And that kind of sparked a process of me asking my friends in the last year of high school about their religion. And I remember asking one of them, what kind of horrible religion do you belong to? I used to ask them that, and in hindsight, now I could empathize with them and see how they felt the day when they walked into school the next day. And everyone's kind of staring at them as they walk through the door. Not staring at them, but the non-Muslims are definitely like, whoa, like suspicious, right? Because already, the narrative is being framed and so on and so forth, right? Or maybe the day after, a few days after, I don't remember. But that turned into a dialogue. That turned into a hiwar and a dialogue itself, which ended up leading me down the path towards embracing Islam, paradoxically enough, right? That which repels you ends up bringing you towards that which you will learn to love.
Yes.
Which is which is, not the Islam of that, of bombs and, buildings on fire, but the Islam of the Prophet. So I would say after 9/11, then the studies kind of began, and then once I became a Muslim and then I entered the university in 2002, I said, well, now the University of Toronto offers many, many courses. One of the largest, of course, Islamic studies departments in the country, larger than McGill, I would say, definitely offers more courses. Yeah. At least in those days, it was a huge department between Middle Eastern studies, between religion, between history, between anthropology. We have, at any time, 30, 40, 50 professors working on Islam at one moment, right? So I started enrolling in those courses, but at first I was enrolled in international IR, international relations, and I chose to ditch that because I was no good at the calculus. I was always very interested in foreign relations, though, and the humanities and politics and things like that. I was never good at at mathematics and the sciences at all. And growing up, I was always interested in I was just a curious child. I just wanted to know how things worked, right? I remember reading things like the New York Times when I was in like grade 5. The New York Times, The Economist, or I don't know if The Economist was out then, but magazines like that, Also because my brother, was very astute, intelligent person. So he had an influence, and I was always kind of attracted to this. So the study of Islam for me at an early age, this is now talking about 18 years prior when my studies began, are kind of can be put into that general context of a fascination of culture, civilization, history, and I guess humanistic studies in general, which then went into spiritual studies, but at first it began just as humanistic studies itself. Yeah. And then that's really when my studies began formally, in 2002, when I decided to major in Middle Eastern civilizations,
would you be able to quickly identify maybe very important either figures or works that were very influential in molding your personality, either that would have happened later or really even from the beginning?
First, the Quran. Most importantly, the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal. I remember reading it before I became Muslim, and and it would bring me. I would cry sometimes in my bed at night as I read it, and I would hide it. I would turn my my side light off, and I would put it under my bed, and it was this kind of inexplicable connection with it. I don't understand what it is. It's very hard to describe. But when you read the ayat of the Quran, right, it talks about the يعني وجلت قلوبهم, right? That their hearts tremor from
Absolutely.
it, right?
Yes.
And their hair stands up. And I think that's the feeling that I had, but I didn't know what it was at that time. Of course, I didn't understand what those feelings were. In hindsight, of course, when you read and you see, and they fall on their athqan, on their chins, and they do, and all of these things. Now, then you see what the power of the Quran is, you know. And it had a very profound impact on my heart, which I kept secret for a long time, for fear of reprisals. Of course, in a post 9/11 world, I mean, it was very dangerous to talk about these things, and I would and combined with that, the listening to the Quran itself, and then a friend of mine gave me a book on the life of the Prophet. I don't remember the name of the book. It was a big green book, and it was about the life of the Prophet and his role in other religious traditions, or the foretelling of his coming in other religious traditions, and a little bit about prophecies. Yeah. And I would say these two books. I was very young. I mean, I'm probably like 17 years old at the time here. These two books, the Quran and this other book about the life of the Prophet and his coming, had a really profound effect on my heart. And there was something at that moment, as the months went on, I can't explain, where I felt like my heart was tied like a rope to that of the Prophet, to the Quran and the Prophet. Yes. You can't describe that feeling. It's that feeling of your heart when you hear his name, your heart trembles. Just the name of the Prophet, but not Ali and Fatima. All that's a later story, but just the Prophet and his life in Makkah, his life in Medina, and I would say those two books really had, of course, the Book of Allah, and I don't remember the name of this book, but it was something about the Prophet and his coming and just who this person was. And apparently the foretelling or some references to him in Hindu texts, because I was a Hindu.
Yes.
And these had profound effect on me as well. And there were many other things as well, but it's just a few things, yeah.
And then were there any specific personalities, figures, people who either at that time or later entered into your life and would have started shaping the person that you are today?
Definitely. I mean, I owe a huge debt of gratitude, of course, first to Allah Azza wa Jal, al-awwal wal-akhir. But after that, Dr. Liaquat Takim, and I'll tell you why. Because his son, Professor Dr. Liaquat Takim, his son and I went to school together, and his son found out I'm becoming Muslim or interested in Islam or whatever. And he's like, my dad's a Maulana. Like, why don't you come over? Like, you can ask him questions.
Yes.
And Dr. Takim at that time, I was a very young boy. And Dr. Takim obviously was a professor of Islamic studies at the University of Denver, University of Toronto. I don't remember where he was then at the time. I think at U of T. Or he was in between universities at the time. And he had this massive library. I mean, huge. Although in retrospect now, I think my library might be the same size or bigger than his. But anyhow, at the time, I mean, that library was huge. And he gave me books, and he used to give me so much time and explain to me Islam and sit with me. And if he's going somewhere, he'd say, hey, let me pick you up. We can chat in the car. And those initial conversations were some of the most beautiful conversations I had in my life that I cherish. After Dr. Takim, especially, this is now the turn towards understanding Islam, and he took me into his home as almost like a son, in that sense, almost like that, like his family, and because obviously, and then I had other friends as well. But as far as someone who can intellectually, guide me and spiritually guide me, he was my first point of contact, who happened to live down the street from me. So I remember I would walk over to his house, and then after that, of course, very quickly came in 2002 winter, came Sayyid Muhammad al-Radawi, Hujjul Islam wal Muslimin, Sayyid Muhammad al-Radawi, Allah Maqama, who then from that day, for the past 17, 18 years, has been my teacher. And I remember asking him a question one day. I was just a young man. I don't even think I even barely had a goatee. I barely had even the hairs here. Then definitely not a beard like this. Very just light hairs on my face. And I come up to him and I ask him a question. I say, well, why do Shia slander the Sahaba? And he looked at me and he told me, come and see me and we'll chat about it. And then that was the beginning of a relationship of 18 years with him as his student, learning from him for all these years. And he was so patient with me and teaching me. And we would meet in evenings in his office where he'd have a pile of books and notes every time he would meet me. And he would not give me the reasons, the answers. He would let me come to my own conclusions, right? And now in hindsight, people are like, wow, you had that kind of interaction with him. And at that time, I didn't know who he was. I just thought he's just a scholar. Then obviously as time went on, so those two individuals at the beginning of my journey were absolutely pivotal in me being, guided. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Those two
So
people.
thank you very much for that. I think fascinating journey and fascinating experience. Let me shift gears a little bit here. And so going back to that quote, you're making here a reference to culture.
Yeah.
And so allow me to read a little paragraph here from this book of What is Islam by Shahab Ahmed, in which I think he talks about something perhaps similar. And I would love to hear your thoughts or your comments about this. And so here I'm obviously going back to when you say upon hindsight, I'm not sure if there is really such a thing or such a thing exists or can be labeled as Islamic. So when he starts in his first chapter, he says, I'm seeking to say the word Islam in a manner that expresses the historical and human phenomenon that is Islam in its plenitude and complexity of meaning. In conceptualizing Islam as a human and historical phenomenon, I am precisely not seeking to tell the reader what Islam is as a matter of divine command, and thus I'm not seeking to prescribe how Islam should be followed as a means to existential salvation. Rather, I seek to tell the reader what Islam has actually been as a matter of human fact in history, and thus I'm suggesting how Islam should be conceptualized as a means to a more meaningful understanding of both of Islam and the human experience, and thus of the human experience at large, so beyond Islam. And I think here there is, I see something in clear reference to maybe pluralism, and this is more obviously, as he's saying, this is not the prescriptive, this is not from the religious perspective, the humanistic one. And so it made me, when I remember reading this, it made me think, and you refer to it, when you say upon hindsight, I'm not sure if such a thing really exists or can be labeled as Islamic. Any thoughts on this? Any comments?
So
yes.
What I meant that is outside of the divine commands,
Yes.
outside of those things that we know are divine commands, or the way of the Ahlul Bayt, the Medina, that Madinatul Fadila, right, so to speak, the virtuous city.
Yes.
Does that really exist? Outside of, let's say, the city of the Prophet himself, the city of Amir al-Mu'mineen. After that point, can we really find that Madinatul Fadila, the virtuous city, the one that Farabi speaks about, right? That everyone wants and seeks after. And the answer to that question is we're all human beings with our faults, with our, social cultural contexts in which we grow up in. And can we really define a culture or a country or a place as Islamic? I find that to be a very, not only from a social cultural perspective, I find it to be from a historical perspective very problematic. This whole notion of saying this is an Islamic school. I'm not saying that it's not an Islamic school. What I'm saying is that when using that in absolute terms,
to say that this is Islam.
This is Islam.
Yes.
I mean, well, these people are also products of their own human conditions, of so many other things. Unless you've reached a point in your spiritual progress, in your tazkiyah to nafs, in your tahdhibun nafs and tazkiyah, and your ta'aleem and your teaching and your studying, that you are at the level of distinguishing between your hawa, your desires, and haqq. That is a very high station to reach. Or distinguishing between our khatarat, our whims and our thoughts and our oham, and haqq. Right? So that's
the absolute truth.
The absolute truth. And I think that's something that is limited in the absolute sense to the ma'asumeen, whose essence essentially, who embody that essence in every way, shape, or form. From people like myself, or those people roaming the streets of Dubai or wherever they are, life is complicated. Life is full of gray areas and intersections of different concerns and factors and feelings and emotions, and to say that this is Islamic in a prescriptive, doctrinal, legal, philosophical way is perhaps misleading.
Absolutely.
Maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I guess it's my job to do that,
absolutely.
Splitting hairs. But I find that to be a problematic description, and that's where I don't agree with all the findings of Shahab Ahmad's book. Of course, But the general kind of outlay, where, for example, by saying like, how do we define Avicenna, for example, as Islamic? I completely agree to a certain extent. I think that for the falasifa in the early period, was the prescriptive revelation and sunnah a priori to them, or were the postulates of the Aristotelian and Platonic tradition a priori to them, and then the revelation and the sunnah would have to fit within that paradigm? Which one comes first, the cart or the horse, so to speak, right?
They superimpose them on religion.
Exactly.
And,
So we need to look at that. And the same argument could be, or the same view could be said about culture, unless we are at a very astute and erudite level of distinguishing between our hawa and our desires and haqq at every moment. Right?
And who can claim that?
And who can claim that except the ma'asumeen, the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the anbiya and the mursaleen and the aimma tahireen, who can claim that other than them? And thus to define something in an absolute way as being Islamic, as embodying the message of Allah Azza wa Jal and the Prophet, I think is a very grandiose claim to make.
Yes.
From a philosophical perspective.
Absolutely. Yes. Very clear. Even though splitting hair, but I completely agree.
I guess that's my job
and
sometimes.
That is your job.
That's what they ask me to do, right?
And that's perhaps a good segue into the next chapter, I would guess, in your journey, where you become an academic.
Yeah.
And you embark on an academic journey of studying Islam, both from a, as we said, traditional point of view, as well as an academic, Western university point of view. And I saw a number of your writings, and in there, for instance, you have an article on interfaith marriage. And in there, maybe there's a reference to this or not. So the article is about, you take three towering figures in Shi'i legal theory. So you take Shaykh al-Tabrasi, Shaykh Yusuf al-Bahrani, and Sayyid Abdul A'la al-Sabzawari, and you compare their positions about a very technical legal matter, which is can a Shi'i Muslim marry a non-Muslim? And I can let you definitely speak about that, but the quote I had taken out from there, and perhaps it was in relation to the same topic, was I seem to be recognizing there is a running theme across the manner in which you think and approach things. And so you say at some point, I have chosen 3 authors from different centuries who produced 3 genres of work as a window into further understanding the multivocal nature of Imami Shi'i discourse with regards to the non-Muslim other. And I thought maybe here again is this reference to this pluralism. I don't want to say relativism, but there's definitely, I think, an intentional motive there, driver there, a nuance, a subtle reference always to this pluralistic thought, making sure that you do not present a one-dimensional version of Islam. So any comments on that?
So, as a historian of Islamic intellectual history, or a historian, someone who works on intellectual history, you can't. Islam is, well, that's a tough thing to say, Now, there are certain things you can't say. There are certain things you can definitely allude to, as I was mentioning today about Sayyidah Zahra and things. There are certain things that are so categorical, that are so widespread, that you could almost say this is what the tradition says. And then there are things, which are the majority of it, where you cannot say 100%, as they say, miya bi miya, that this is it, this is the only view, because the intellectual tradition of Islam, not only Imamiyya, has always been multivocal and multivalent. It is. That's the nature of scholarship. It will be multivocal. It will be multivalent. Now, that doesn't mean that I believe that all the views are correct. No, I believe we should search for the correct view. We don't just say, oh, there's multiple views, so they're all correct. No, definitely some views are stronger than others. But we need to appreciate how scholars have come at these positions, on what foundations have they used, what is their mabani, what is their usloob, what is their epistemological point of departure when they're looking at these texts. And if we understand their epistemology and the history of their epistemology and the kind of the construction of that epistemology, because an epistemology needs to be constructed.
Yes.
It needs to be constructed somehow. Then we begin to understand the results. Yeah. The results are not as interesting as the epistemology itself, right? The results will be different. Yes. So, and that's the nature of revelation and tradition, that as soon, as I think Heinz, who says this? Not Heinz Helm. One of the German scholars, I don't remember his name now. He says something so interesting, right? That basically, as soon as we start reading something, we're interpreting it. There is an interpretive process that is going through our mind.
Maybe Gadamer or
Gadamer and people like this. So there is an interpretive process that is going through our mind. That doesn't mean that the results are that all truth is relative. Now we have to determine which usloob, which method is the best and the closest. And that's what ijtihad is, essentially, right? And that's why these 3 towering figures approach a subject, again, from 3 different genres. I'm not saying they're the same, but I'm just looking at how they deal with the same subject in a different way.
Yes. It's almost you're more, I don't know if I can say that, you tell me, you're almost more interested in the epistemological dimension. So you're more interested in their initial premises and their the starting points of their methodology and where they come from and how they get there, more than their actual ruling.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I'm interested more in the usul than the furuh here.
Yes.
Right? That because really for me the honey can be found, the sweet honey can be found when you get to the really nitty-gritty, the parameters of their thinking.
Yes.
That's what I want to know.
Yes.
The furuh, the differences will be there.
Yeah.
Those differences will be, those are also interesting. But in understanding the foundational premise upon which They're different, whether it be in the realm of metaphysics, whether it be in the realm of law, whether it be in the realm of philosophy or theology or whatever it is that we're speaking of.
Yeah.
I love, that is my kind of my modus operandi. That's how I like to look at subjects. And I guess my writings to a certain extent convey that,
Yes.
you know, and my publications to a certain extent. Although I've never thought of it that way, now that you mention it to me, it's kind of something that is I guess second nature to me now as a
Yes.
method of writing,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
of an interest to me. Whatever I'm working on, whether it be Da'an Ziyarat or theology or tafsir or law, you know, I'm interested in the history of ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very philosophical starting point.
Yeah.
So let's move to the work you did in your master's.
Yeah.
So first you have to, I'm going to try to summarize it, and you have to tell me if I'm hitting the nail on the head or I'm, not on the track. So if I understood correctly, the work that you did in about the figure of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam in your master's thesis was basically to show that there's a narrative around her figure that is basically a construction of that narrative that was also used to reinforce, let's call them the dogmatic or doctrinal positions of the two sects. And from there, you took out an even more important, perhaps, conclusion, which is, as opposed to the general treatment that the figure of Fatima al-Zahra has received by Western scholarship or Orientalists in general, she is in fact a pivotal figure, a central figure that has been extremely influential afterwards. But you need to do that kind of, let's call it, archaeological digging to expose the way that the narrative was constructed, created, and used. So first of all, is this what you're trying to say? Am I capturing it correctly or not? And secondly, what got you to even ask that question in the first place? What got you interested in the figure of Fatima al-Zahra to spend that kind of time and research on this one aspect in the history of Islam?
I was always interested in the drama that unfolded and the saga of the Prophet's death, and in her death herself. And it is so, how should I say, it is such a touchy subject. It is so explosive that I said, I want to write about it. It is so interesting. It is so dramatic. It is so provocative that I said, wow, you see something provocative, you say, well, I want to unturn every stone on this until I get to the bottom of this, till I really get to the core of the issues here, And of course, my thesis supervisor at that time, Dr. Linda Clark at Concordia, was of course a great guide and a great help in guiding my writing and guiding my work, and even for years following, although I haven't been in touch with her for some time, but she was a really important person, I would say, Dr. Clark and Sayyid Muhammad al-Radawi, who I spent years and countless hours reading nusus. I mean, I'm talking like text after text after text, reading it together, and then other scholars as well, spending time in translating texts and things like this. So it was a whole process. And I was interested in it because I love the history of ideas, and I want to know why people think the way they think. Why do they believe? I'm not interested in what they believe per se.
It's more how they got there.
The process of how they got there, right? It's the journey that's more interesting than the actual end result. Now, of course, the end result is important. Either you're on haq or batil. I'm not saying that's not important. I'm talking about intellectually, as an academic, I'm interested in learning about the history of that process, right? And that's what I did with regards to this thesis. I wanted to know how these events have been presented, grappled with, dealt with, and negotiated by both camps.
Yes.
And the conclusion that I came to is that it is oil and water. This is essentially khat al-ahmar. This is the red line in the sand, because here you're talking about the murder of the daughter of the Prophet. I mean, what can be more provocative. This is more provocative than the killing of Hussein. Definitely. I mean, because this is 61 years after, it's by Yazid, doesn't really know the Prophet. These are by the Prophet's companions claiming or alleging that they were involved in a murder. I mean, what more exciting and provocative murder mystery can you investigate than that, really? I mean, if you want to talk about something that's provocative, it's definitely provocative. And I just found it so fascinating. I just wanted to know about it, right? So then I just started studying just everything I could get my hands on. I mean, it was years before the Masters that this started. Masters was just a writing process. It was years before this. I mean, all the time. I mean, you know, the months were spent in Robarts and libraries and in finding one little reference that I could find on this subject, you know, and then compiling it in this huge compilation of notes.
Yes.
And then the thesis is essentially taking all those hundreds of texts and sources and putting a cogent narrative together.
Yes.
That's
creating
essentially
a synthesis
of that, right?
Absolutely.
And that's essentially what research is, right? So,
yes.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
If we go to your PhD thesis, again, I think there's this perhaps a dimension that you're saying maybe you haven't recognized it yourself, but me having gone quickly through a big number of your writings. So when it comes to your PhD thesis, now you have turned your attention to another field in Islam. So whereas in the case of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, I think it's a lot more of a historical analysis. Now you have completely gone into the world of hadith, the world of narration and the tradition. And you decide to look specifically at dua and ziyarah. And you are able to show that, especially, let's say, in the world of Shi'ism, the dua and the ziyarah start playing a role of creating the identity of that community. And it becomes a part and parcel of who they are for whatever is to come. So that's kind of my, skimming through. That's what I got from it.
Yeah.
And once again, how did you get involved in that topic? What got you to, this is not a murder mystery anymore.
No, it's not.
That's one. And two, I think here, I was thinking about this because, as an academic myself, sometimes we look at these topics from a very academic lens.
Yeah.
And so I'm asking you a very personal question. Do you feel that as a result of this in-depth, extensive academic study about a topic like dua and ziyarah, do you feel that you have a renewed appreciation of the role in your life or your spirituality, or is it worth it? Does it give that kind of benefit to you? Besides or beyond or above the academic. The academic is of course there.
The intellectual side, yeah.
So this is more the pragmatic and the spiritual. So how did you get involved into this topic? First of all, am I even hitting it again on the head? Am I right in the way I'm trying to analyze what you tried to do? And how did you get involved in this? And practical ramifications into your life.
So how I got involved in it, I love dua and I love ziyarah. The subjects that I choose are those that I find personally fulfilling, spiritually. The love of the Ahlul Bayt, and one of the things that led me to Islam to begin with was the death of Sayed Zahra, first of all. So I was personally invested in wanting to know about this, right? Spiritually invested, not just intellectually invested. Very much theologically and spiritually invested. However, when I'm writing, of course, I'm not writing from that perspective. I'm writing from an academic perspective while allowing the voices of my subjects to speak for themselves.
And you have a wonderful academic pen, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I try to allow them to speak for themselves. And that's what I've done with the dua and ziyarah subject, right? What I've looked at, I said, look, this is something which is so ubiquitous. Dua and ziyarah are two sides of the same coin. There's tashayyu and there's dua and ziyarah. Dua and ziyarah and tashayyu. It's like they're the same thing, essentially, right? and is Dua Kumail and Ziyarat Ashura. I mean, like, or whatever, any other ziyarat that we recite. It's so ubiquitous. But what I wanted to know is, okay, this is how it is today. But how did we get here?
Once again.
Exactly, right?
Yes.
How did we get here? Again, I want to look at the intellectual history, the intellectual legacy. You know, as Eaton Kohlberg told me once, you know, Dr. Kohlberg in an email, which is a very nice exchange I had with him. He's the famous professor in Israel, right? The famous scholar of Shiism, Eaton Kohlberg. He told me once, he said that you would see that it has a very, he didn't use the word rich, pristine legacy. A very remarkable legacy.
In reference to dua and ziyarah specifically, the liturgy, yes.
But he said, I never really had a chance to look deep into it. You're one of the first people to do it. And this is what Dr. Lawson, my supervisor, told me as well, that since Ane Qurban 50 years ago, no one's really opened this door.
Right.
Since Qurban on Islam Iranian, and since in his other works where he just kind of alludes to this subject. Padwick a little bit, mostly from a Sunni perspective, looking at the works of Ghazali and others, or, you know, the other, you know, Ahzab and things like this. So I was like, one, it's unexplored. Two, it's something so spiritually meaningful to me. It brings me to tears. So it's something I'm personally attached to. Intellectually, it's an area which is relatively unexplored, very much relatively, such that I had to create my own methodology to study this. And number three, it's also a hot button topic. Because these days, you know, we live in an era in which a lot of people, as I mentioned, have a lot of opinions about things that they don't know about. Right? Most things that are said are very vacuous, right? They're very vacuous.
Yeah, not much scholarship.
There's not much scholarship on this. And when I came across, you know, people like Sayyid Muhammad Hussein Jalali, who was a student of Marashi Najafi, a student of Agha Zurk, and I had an opportunity to meet with them, and Sayyid Sistani, Allah Maqama, who guided the project at the very beginning, Samahata Sayyid al-Marja al-A'la. He hit on something very important in about a 40-minute conversation that we had just on this mas'ala only, mas'ala wahida, which is the history of dua and ziyarah.
Yes.
When he found out I had chosen the subject, he turned to me, and there's a gathering of people, must be like 50, 60 people in the room, and he just forgot that they were there. And he just entered a mubahatha, like Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, beginning talk, and imagine who's talking to you about what, right? It's so like your hands are shaking, right? You know, and that was my first interaction with him, right? Many years ago. I mean, because this project has been 8, 9 years, 10 years in the making. Yeah. And he begins and he says, turns to me, as him and Sheikh Muslim Dawadi, but especially Sayyid Ali Sistani at Manjal A'la, you know, he said to me, what a subject. We don't have anything on it, not even in Arabic. Hatta fil Arabi. There's just some safahat here and there, some awraq here, hunna wa hunak. There's nothing actually concrete since Abu Zurq or Sheikh al-Amini, Sahib al-Ghadir. So he said, very good subject. And he was so excited. And when he was excited, I became even more excited. I just dived into the sources and said, I am dedicating the next, you know, whatever, 8, 9 years that I can to be completely absolved in learning about the historical trajectory of this literature. Where did it begin? How did it begin? Who were the progenitors of this tradition? What do we know about this? Where did it come from? What do we know about the manuscripts? How did the ulama interact with it? What was their experience with it? Was it more cultural? Was it more religious? Was it an intellectual enterprise? Was it more just a parochial enterprise? And the answer is, it is not parochial at all, but it finds itself at the very center of Shia intellectual life, right? And it becomes a nexus and meeting point of the general population and the scholars. And one of the few things that they all share, which is dua and ziyarah, right? And thus it has such a multitude of levels with regards to its meaning and its experience, right? You have the level of Sheikh Tusi, and Sheikh al-Mufid, and Sheikh al-Saduq, and Alam al-Hilli, who are reading the same supplications, and then you have people like myself, who are reading that supplication with a very different understanding than Alam al-Hilli. But when do the scholars and the people read from the same book? This is an example.
Yes.
And that's why it's also very important.
Yes.
Because it gives us an insight into not only the intellectual history, but the social cultural history of Tashayyu. And it's unique for that reason, I think. At least that's what I try to express, that it is unique. Yeah.
Yes.
I hope I explained myself.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely, you did. I don't want to keep talking about all of your work, so let me flip the question.
Yeah.
You obviously have a multitude of interests in Islam. So if someone were to ask you, what are your main areas of interest today? What are you interested in researching, either to find out more about or to present to the world more about? What would you say those are?
That's like a kid in a candy store. It's like having a kid in a candy store and forcing me to choose which candy I like the most. You know, I would definitely say continuing with the subject of liturgy for now, and its manuscripts and its development, and looking at certain critical editions of texts and how it came about. I think the thesis is just a beginning, really, for this. And alhamdulillah, inshallah, once it's finished, it will be published with an academic publisher. Already discussions for it to be published. And translated into Arabic as well in Najaf. There's already, I get calls every day from Shaykh Ghalib Nasser and my colleagues, and when they're not, I'm honored to have them. These are the muthaqifeen, the Ahlul Khibra, of course, people like Shaykh Ghalib Nasser, Sayyid Mustafa Sadr, call me all the time and say, Sheikh, is it finished? You know, what's going on, you know? What's the situation?
The pressure is on
we're waiting.
Yes.
Even حتى في النجف نحن منتظرون. We're waiting for the Risala to finish, so we can quickly put it into an Arabic edition as well. So it's just a step one, I think. I think now we need to go in depth into various supplications. And we need to develop methodologies very similar, I wouldn't say similar, but in a similar vein to how the Psalms and the Hebrew prayers are studied. I think it is an extremely untapped field.
It is.
And it is a sea, it's a bahar of things. Both from the historiographical perspective, from the manuscript perspective, from the philosophical perspective. I mean, I was just speaking to a friend last night as we were going home. I mean, these are the kind of conversations we're having in the car. You could imagine. This is why, you know, people say that we're crazy sometimes, academics. It's like, who thinks about these kinds of things? I'm sitting with him and I'm telling him, I say, you know, brother, we really need to look at the Neoplatonic and Aristotelian influences on supplication and ziyarat, because the correlations and parallels are uncanny in the symbolism that we see.
It's very difficult to miss or ignore.
to miss or ignore. But that is a huge subject. Just to open that door and step into it. It's just, you know, as a friend of mine once told me, a Sayyid, he said, you need an army to look at what you want to look at here, because, you know, this is a huge project. And that's why, to that effect, we are starting the Shia Research Institute in Toronto, which inshallah will be the first, inshallah, as it grows, the first Shia Muslim Divinity School at the University of Toronto, or affiliated in some way, inshallah, with the University of Toronto, and a research center for manuscript studies as well, where then we can have the time to really sit diligently, look at this and others. I mean, there's other subjects that I'm very interested in as well. This is just one subject that I'm interested in. Another very interesting project that I would love to look at is the history of my teacher, Sayyid Muhammad Hussain al-Jalali, and his teacher, Abu Zuk Tehrani, and his teacher, Sahib Mustadrak al-Wasail, Nuri Tabrasi. That silsila of the three of them, and then Mar'ashi Najafi in the mix as well, of course, and then ending towards with Abdul Aziz Muhakkik Tabatabai. That group of people, what they accomplished, Allahu Akbar. I mean,
how prolific and
these
expert.
These are the paragons of intellectualism in the Shia world, you know. And I mean, these are, for example, has anyone really done a serious study of the Khatim of Mustadrak? I mean, my Lord, is that a bahar? Is that a sea? If you go into the Khatima of Mustadrak al-Wasail, forget about Mustadrak al-Wasail, the Khatima of Mustadrak al-Wasail. What has Nuri Tabrasi done here with the various fawaid that he constructs? Allahu Akbar. I mean, this would be years on itself to look at. And in fact, I have a manuscript of his shajara. It's called Mawaqi' al-Nujum. It's a manuscript I have. I've not seen the manuscript anywhere else. It's a copy of a manuscript of the whole Khatim of Mustadrak, handwritten. It's page after page after page, and the Fihras is done by Sayyid Muhammad Hussain al-Jalali. And then there's many other works and manuscripts I have. Kunutat Mawalina al-Aim al-Athar, which is the kunuts of the Imams. I have a manuscript from the 6th, 7th century of that, from the Aga Khan Library in Geneva. That needs to be studied. I mean, this is very interesting stuff. And then compared, obviously, to the riwayah that Ibn Tawus provides in Muhaj al-Da'awat. So there are so many different things. These are very specialized studies.
Absolutely.
You know, very specialized kinds of studies.
Yeah, but with far-reaching conclusions.
With far-reaching conclusions.
Yes,
but one of the greater conclusions that I come up with about these things is this is a sacred tradition. It is a sacred tradition. It is an intimate tradition. It is a spiritual tradition. And it is largely an authentic tradition. If we broaden our parameters of what authenticity means, obviously, aside from the whole sanad and rawi kind of jara wa ta'adil approach to authenticity, jara wa ta'adil as in the sense of, you know, like reliable and unreliable narrators, obviously for those who are not, obviously, you know, conversant with these words. But I think that there's a lot that can be contributed to the Shia world, you know. And there's another project as well on the go at the moment, which we are just finishing on the Musnad of Imam al-Kadhim, which is about 20 or 30 pages by a al-Mizwari or Mazuri. I have to get the right vocalization, because in these manuscripts you have to be careful how you vocalize, which is the Musnad of Imam al-Kadhim as preserved by Ash-Shafi'i in the early 7th century. Now, that is interesting. In a manuscript which we have from Maktaba Dhahiriya from Dimashq. This was, of course, shared with me by one of my teachers who was a student of Abu Tehrani. I mean, these are great scholars. Just to put it in perspective, these are people like Sheikh al-Wahid. I mean, these are people like Sheikh Wahid, Mirza Jawad, Sayyid Ali Sistani. I mean, these were the students of Abu Zurq, or people who are in that. So this manuscript was shared with me by someone from that group. And he had not had time. And he wrote a short taqdeem, a short introduction to it. But I'd like to try. I'm working right now on a full, complete translation, a taqreej, a commentary on it, because it's very interesting. Now we have the ahadith of Imam Kadhim as preserved through an ijazah of a Shafi'i Sunni scholar in Damascus, which brings up all kinds of other questions, which is the intersection between Tashayyu and Tasannun, between Sunni and Shi'is, Ahlul Bayt and Sunnis, ahadith. What kind of ahadith does he narrate? Are they doctrinal? Are they mostly legal? Are they mostly things that won't cause controversy? And why? And can these traditions be found in other sources as well? And what does it tell us about the role of Imam al-Kadhim, Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, in the Sunni tradition?
Yes.
And this is something unique. So
this
is some of the
projects. Yeah, that the influence is two-way.
Of course it's two-way. Of course it is. Yeah. Right? And they're issuing ijazahs for the Musnad of Imam al-Kadhim. Because the manuscript begins with an ijazah, and we have the manuscript from the 600s of Hijrah. We have a microfilm of the manuscript. So this is interesting stuff. Another one is the Manaqib of Fatima al-Zahra by Abu Hakim Nisapuri, of course, which I have the manuscript from the Maktaba Suleymaniya. Yeah, I think Suleymaniya in Turkey. I don't remember what the name of the library is, but that's also a very old manuscript. It's been published once in Arabic, but I think to produce a serious translation of this would be very interesting, because the whole book is devoted to the virtues of Fatima al-Zahra as narrated by Sahib Mustadrak ala Sahihain, right, which is Nisapuri, which is very interesting, and it's for this reason that he was accused of being a Shi'i. Yes, Shi'i, yeah. Right, so anyhow, there's so many candies in the store. Like I said, so this door can, we have to slowly close that door again, Yeah.
Obviously, you're someone who has spent a lot of time studying religion, both academically and through traditional Islamic studies. So let's try to take advantage of your experience as a student and as a scholar. First of all, I think today there's the internet and technology has made it very easy for someone to have access to, unfathomable amounts of information and teachers and works. So generally speaking, and I don't know in your case, how much would you say is, let's say, the percentage or the ratio between your independent study versus always being in the presence of a teacher or under the direction and supervision of a teacher. What is generally your opinion and even perhaps your advice in this kind of world? The importance of being associated with a teacher or not, and relying, let's say, more on technology and correspondence and the internet, for instance, as opposed to actually being under the tutelage of a teacher.
Yeah. So I think this is very important. And the reason I'll tell you is because, and again, all my mistakes are owned by me, obviously, and not by anyone else. I take full ownership of my mistakes. And there's many mistakes in my scholarship. There is in everybody's scholarship.
Of course.
If I did not have the guidance of people like Sayyid Muhammad al-Radawi and Sayyid Muhammad Hussein al-Jalali and Sheikh Muhammad Hassan al-Muballigh and Sayyid Mustafa Sadr and Sheikh Ghalib Nasser and Sayyid Sistani. Again, I'm not claiming to be a student of Sayyid Sistani. I'm not. It's just the conversations that we've had about the subject. I'm not a student of his, and I'm not claiming that at all. People like Sayyid al-Hakim, people like Sheikh Bashir and Najafi, who's actually written for me documents on this subject. He's written for me a bath of his own hand on the subjects. This has exponentially clarified for me things that I otherwise would have made a mess of. Because we have to accept that whatever we read, we're not the first ones to have read it. We should not be arrogant enough to think that we're the first at it. There is an intellectual, the first to ask the question or even attempt to answer it, or even to think of it. Maybe someone hasn't written it, but I'm sure someone has thought about it. And obviously, my writing is independent, my research is, and once you learn the research skills, then you can almost write on anything. If you have the knowledge of those subjects, whether it be in fiqh, whether it be in usul, whether it be in philosophy, whether it be in history, as you can see, my interests are so kind of wide, you know? And I think that's, again, because of the influence of Sayyid Muhammad al-Radawi, because he is such a scholar of such great caliber. I mean, I can read with him Avicenna, and I could switch from Avicenna to Tabari. From Tabari back to Avicenna, from Avicenna to Sharif al-Murtada, from Sharif al-Murtada to, to Ziyarat al-Mutlaqa of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. From that to Ali bin Ibrahim al-Qummi's introduction. This is what it means by a scholar who has huwa musallat ala nusus. He understands how to read nusus and understand them.
Yes.
I'm just giving that as one example. There's many other scholars like that as well. And when you meet people like this, they teach you things. Even if they don't know the answer to the question, they'll help you think about the question in a way that will always be enriching to you. Be enriching. Either by correspondence or in person. I think it is very important. Until we're at the stage where we say that, even then, I don't think we're ever at the stage where we say, I don't need anyone to read my work. I don't think that. Because even the mujtahid has his students read his work. Even the mujtahid has his students do munaqasha of his bahath and his discussion. So even the maraja have people, critiquing them every day in class, right? And that's how they sharpen their own ideas, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a point where we could simply say we can just be independent. And I think sometimes when we become too independent, we make mistakes. Or we'll still make mistakes the other way, but we will make more mistakes and there will be more reckless mistakes. We'll be more reckless. So we need both an intellectual mentor and spiritual mentors who keep us humble, who teach us humility, who can correct us both spiritually and intellectually when we are perhaps exceeding the limits. When we're entering into thinking about something that perhaps, might not be the best way of thinking about it. Again, it's not to control our mind, but to give us that sense of mentorship. And I think that's very important, to have both spiritual mentorship and intellectual mentorship. And if you can find spiritual and intellectual mentorship in the same person, then that is an ustad, then that is a teacher. And if you have multiple people who can serve that purpose, then that is, of course, there's no greater ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than that, right? Because at the end of the day, as I always tell people, I could be left with nothing at the end of the day, materially. But those relationships are beyond any material wealth, because they enrich you both spiritually and intellectually, and that's the madhab of Ahlul Bayt.
أحسنتم. If someone were to say to you that I'm trying to start to study Islam, and the feeling I get is simply that I am overwhelmed with the amount of information, the amount of scholars and schools and works, and even fields that there are. Where do I start? What do I do if I wanted to study Islam? What advice would you have for them?
I think the very important part would be start with a primer on Islam. You need to have a general understanding of the topography of Islamic intellectual history. For me, that was Marshall Hodgson's Adventure of Islam. I started reading that book about 14 years ago, and I'm still reading it, the 3 volumes. So I've been reading the same book for 14 years. Because Hodgson, I believe, is one of the most remarkable minds in the academy that has ever come across in the past, I don't know, century. And the work was written in the 60s, yet it is still a seminal work today. And, actually, when I was coming here, I was like, should I take the 2nd volume with me in the suitcase or should I leave it? And I said, leave it. I'll take something else that I need to look at the moment. So I left Hodgson at home, but still my heart feels like, oh my God, it's at home. I don't have it. If I feel I need
time, if
it's at night, I want to look at it. I want to look at his chapter, obviously, on the Sufi tariqas and the new Sunni internationalism. Again, it's not that I haven't read it, but I've been reading those same works for about 14 or 15 years, the same books. Because when you realize you need to develop an understanding of the topography of Islamic intellectual history, of its general contours, you need to find, and it might not be Hodgson, this is in English I'm talking about. Obviously, in Arabic, there are other great sources, Da'iratul Ma'arif in Persian. There's so many other sources as well. I'm not saying that Hodgson's the only one. And I'm not saying everything that Hodgson described a phenomena that would take 100 pages and he can do it in 2 or 1. But then you have to be kind of initiated into his work, the Okumen and Kerygma and all of these things. You have to understand where he's coming from here, right? But I think this is very important. If somebody, before they choose what they really want to specialize on, get a general understanding of the topography of Islamic intellectual history. But you need to read these books with a teacher. There's no way, I don't think someone can just pick up Hodgson and read it. I remember when Hodgson was first given to me by Professor Wali Saleh at the University of Toronto many years ago. This must have been 2004, maybe. He gave us pages 1 to 100 the first week. It was like reading Greek. But then when he started explaining it, what it meant, you started to understand it, right? And then you started to appreciate more what he's trying to get at. So I think having a few good primers on the topography of Islamic intellectual history, start with that. Obviously, if you read Arabic, then there are other works to look at as well in that regard, with regards to those sorts of things, right? Now, it depends what you want to study. If you just want to study Tashayyu, that's good. But before you study Tashayyu, you need to have a general understanding of the topography of Islamic history so you could fit it within the context of the development of the history of ideas. I mean, that's for me personally. I mean, you ask me about what I would suggest to someone, then I think from there you'll start getting ideas of what piques your curiosity per se. Because it's very hard to study one subject without having an understanding of how that subject fits in to the arc of intellectual history. And you need to understand how that subject fits in, both historically, socially, culturally, from the pre-Islamic perspective as well. So you have to understand what preceded Islam, right? As we describe as the late antique milieu, right? Of the Mediterranean basin, right? And understanding that. And when you start understanding that and then you see what came up, it takes many years to do this. Again, it's not easy. You have to go slow. But once you can start connecting the dots, and you could imagine it, just close your eyes and you could imagine you're looking at a map of the world, at a board, and you could start drawing dots. Then you can start saying, okay, now I've begun to understand Islamic intellectual history.
The events are now Going back
coming
to
together
a source. Yeah,
to a
there's
source.
a reason. There's no vacuum.
And then you
Yeah.
choose now, okay, I want to really specialize in philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
I want to really specialize in law. I want to really specialize in usul, for example, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we even see important works like the work by Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Hakim, Usul al-Fiqh al-Muqaran, which is an extremely important historical work. Look at the work that he's done. It's the history of ideas. He says he's looking at usul from a comparative historical perspective. And I think these works, again, I mean, I didn't find this on my own. It's my teachers who showed me these works and said, you know what, look at this. And you'll begin to understand how, for example, we have different views on shuhra riwaiya versus fatwaiya. You know, these different aspects in usul al-fiqh, in usul, you need to have a deeper appreciation. Just don't know the words of what they are. You have to understand where it comes from. Then you need to go to Mufid, you go to Murtada, and before that Himyari, and before that someone else, and before that you have to go to the akhbar of the Imams and how it unfolded at that time. The Hanafis and the Shafi'is and the Malikis and the Hanbalis and the Zahiris and Tabari and on and on and on, right? Yeah. And our scholars from the earliest period always had minds like this, because that's how they could deconstruct Fadak. That's how they could deconstruct the Khilafah, the Imama, these subjects like Shaykh al-Mufid and Sharif Murtada and Shaykh al-Tusi and even Shaykh al-Saduq. If you read the introduction to Kamaluddin with Mamu Ni'ma, the intro is almost as important as the Nas itself.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? That 100-page intro should be wajib reading. Yes. But I went with a teacher because you will not understand what Saduq is saying there unless it is profoundly historical, the arguments that he's putting. But you have to have a context now to understand what Saduq is talking about, the Zaydiyya and the Waqifiyya and on, the Ismailiyya. You have to understand where is he coming at?
Yeah, what he's reacting to.
What is he reacting to? Yes. The milieu in which he's writing. You see what I mean? So first have an understanding of the milieu, then you can start choosing the subjects. This is from my angle of the issues that you want to really dive into and specialize in. Yeah.
You've been involved in a number of different hawzat.
Yeah.
Are they all the same but just a different garment? Do you have a special affinity to one of them more than the other? Something more to gain from one over the other? Generally speaking, what were your impressions going from one, or was it an intentional on your part that you wanted to kind of taste different teachers, different schools of addressing the same subject matter, or did it just happen that way?
I think it just happened that way, because my studies started, about in 2005, like outside of the academy, that is. 2004, or I don't remember now. It's so long ago, but that's kind of the trajectory that my studies took. And I wouldn't say I planned it. I would say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his infinite wisdom chose this trajectory for me. But looking in hindsight, each one contributed to my intellectual development in different ways. Right? In London, I had an exposure to both academic and Hawzawi subjects. I had great teachers, right, there. Then in Syria, there was more of a focus on certain subjects that I wanted to study, right? And then in Najaf, which was more of a kind of loose association, not really formal association, but association with specific teachers there. By then, through my academic training, through my studies in Toronto, through my studies elsewhere, I had the necessary skills to kind of almost study a lot of subjects outside of, I would say, really hardcore philosophy, because that isn't my specialization, which is like really peripatetic philosophy is not my specialization. I can teach an undergraduate course on it, but if you want to teach a graduate seminar, no. I mean, I don't think I would right now, take on a graduate seminar in that regard. But other subjects, historiography, tafsir, fiqh, usul, hadith, different subjects like that, akhlaq, I had a kind of, I won't say I was a specialist in them, but I had a handle on them.
A solid background.
Yeah. So then when I was in Najaf, over the years, going back and forth, the teachers that I met could help enrich me in the very specific subjects that I wanted to be enriched in. So for example, I would ask them questions and they would write me books about it. So for example, one of my teachers, I asked him, I came up with a list of questions that I was working with Dua and Ziyarat. And again, it's not about Dua and Ziyarat only, but about the whole history of Ithbat al-Sudur and Qat versus Ghayru Qat', what's Qat'i and Ghayru Qat'i and all of these issues. As I said, it's not always about
Can we
Dua
have
and Ziyarat, certainty
it's
versus
authentic?
something that's not certainty.
Yeah.
How do you confirm philosophically that something is from the Imams? Right? How do you do ithbat and confirmation that this has come from the Imams, right? So these subjects that I was investigating for my thesis became formal training again in those subjects beyond Shahid Athani's, diraya or any work like that. Now it's starting into very experimental kind of discussions with mujtahids, and attending their various buhuth and even Ba'ath al-Kharij and things like this. Of which I'm not claiming to be a specialist in that, but having a good enough exposure to it. And then they began guiding me and saying, well, I think point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you should think about deeper. For example, Sheikh Bashir, he's been a great guide, for me in helping me, not giving me the answers, but the philosophical questions that I should be thinking about a little bit deeper. Again, they don't always give you answers. They give you questions that help you think about the subject that you're working on.
As you said,
right?
they're not trying to control
Not trying
where
to
your mind
control
goes.
your mind. They're saying, you choose what you want to take. But this is point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that I think would be useful for you to contemplate and meditate over as a point of departure. And then those become big areas of inquiry and philosophical and historiographical inquiry, right? And through there, you begin to develop that kind of foundation. So, and it's not only in Najaf and Qum as well. I mean, not only in Najaf, but also within Qum, there have been people that have been extremely gracious to me over the years, and help me. And I can't, of course, leave out my supervisor, Dr. Takim, through all these years, his guiding me, giving me questions, his own research, reading the way he writes, his methodologies, have had an important effect as my supervisor as well, as the chair of my committee. In Najaf was more specialized research than really diving deep into subjects, like having just very specific discussions. For example, we would have a very specific discussion on specific statements attributed to Ibn Tawus. What does that tell us about the history of aqli versus ghayru aqli proofs, right?
Rational versus
Wijdani versus ghayru wijdani,
yes, existential or not.
Right?
Yes.
And intellectual versus mystical and so on and so forth. And what is the effects of any of, let's say, Maytham Bahrani and others within the milieu on that? These are very deep discussions that we're having, right? And we're engaging in coffee and discussions and back and forth, and sometimes there's multiple people sitting in the room contributing. And these are all muhakkikeen. These are all, researchers. Many of them are mujtahids in their own right, sitting at one time.
This is the legendary
right?
reputation of the depth of Hawzat al-Najaf, right?
Yes, right? And everyone will contribute. And I've had these conversations, and it's over the last 7, 8, 9 years, 10 years, or a little bit less than 10 years. And that begins to hone your mind, right? Because you sit, you listen, you take notes, and then you contribute.
Yeah.
And now we're at the point where we're coming, they'll say, okay, you're coming, let's have a gada. So this person will come. He's a specialist in this subject. Specialist. Sayyid Sadiq Al Kharsan will be there. Sayyid Mustafa will be there. These people will be there. And we'll start these subjects. These are very specialized subjects. I mean, the average person would just be like, but for us, we're excited and we're going back and forth.
The relevance may not be
clear. You know
clear,
what I mean?
right?
And it's just so, because we're nitpicking, right? We're splitting hairs because we want to know the truth about a specific subject, right? And for me, those dialogues and discussions are the most enriching. Just to listen and then to contribute. Or even simply sitting with my dear friend Sheikh Ghalib Nasser having a cup of tea in Hawaish, or in the souk, in the market. I'll be walking, I say, Sheikh Ghalib, salam alaikum, ahlan. He says, ta'al, come. We sit. Sheikh Ghalib, of course, is an alim, sidqan wa haqqan in his own right. Student of Sayyid Ali Sabzawari for many years, his many sahib al-kutub wal-mu'allafat. but the humility and the tawadhu and the hospitality is mind blowing, you know. And we just sit and we have a cup of tea, obviously in this plastic cups, right? We're drinking tea or coffee in some random bookshop, talking about, you know, the one statement, you know, Adhillatul Arsh, for example, and how that connects with this or with that, you know, the shadows of the throne or whatever it is, and then jumping from that subject to another subject and then going in depth into that subject, and he's talking about what he's working on at the moment. And all this helps grow, helps build you, right? But you have to depart from a point of humility. Mm-hmm. You have to say, I don't know. I want to just learn. I want to listen. Mm-hmm. Right? And then you always learn something new.
Let me finish with this question so that I don't take more of your time. Yeah. You've been very generous with your time. What would you say, having gone through, I think, a number of different communities? You know, this is a question very dear to my heart. The level of, and I distinguish here between being academic and being an intellectual.
Yeah.
Do you think we need more intellectuals in our communities? That's one. What's your assessment of our potential to have those intellectuals in our communities? And what more can be done if you do agree that more intellectuals are needed to step up and to fill in where the need is, through whether it's through academia or through more advanced traditional Islamic studies? Do we have enough? And if not, what's missing? What do we need to be doing? And is it more of a collective effort? Is it more of an individual effort? Is it more, what's missing? So that we have more intellectuals, people who can step up and deal with life issues, more pragmatic. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about very academic topics. And I think this is where the discussion took us. And inshallah, in the future, we'll talk about more life, day-to-day questions and issues. But we need those people to step up and address them. What do you think is missing right now? What else can we be doing as a community? And what is your assessment of communities in general, at least those that you have interacted with?
Well, first of all, you know, I want to say that, look, you know, I truly believe, as someone who works even within an Islamic school, that whatever knowledge we have to be able to distill it in such a way that it is discernible and understandable to a grade 5 child. We have to be able to do that. We have to be able to distill ideas. We have to be able to understand that every place that we're in has a different requirement. Right? Right? That you speak to people to the degree of their intellect, not to mean that they're not intellectual, but they may not be specialists in that subject, right? So one, we don't patronize people. We try not to do that, of course, not intentionally, of course, ever. And two, we have to, at the end of the day, see, we've spoken a lot about intellectual things. Obviously, a lot of my lectures don't deal with anything that I've spoken about here. Because that's very much my writing, my intellectual, like, not my intellectual side, but my like intellectual writing or whatever you want to call it. As far as the other side goes, I think that we need to make tradition relevant today. Tradition, history, the legacy of tradition, and the sacrality of that tradition needs to come out. It needs to be made relevant, and we need to speak with very clear voices about these issues. And this is where one of the things that I believe is extremely important is the traditional studies is, of course, extremely important. But to supplement that with a very profound understanding, or at least a somewhat of an understanding of continental philosophy, we need to have an understanding of what has gone on the European continent itself, before the Americas, the European continent. We need to have an understanding of, again, certain concepts and ideas that are being thrown around in our community, such as liberalism, such as contact, that was then and this is now. You know, when we're using words like this, you know, but the Prophet was at his time and not my time, you know, or I find that to be unfair, or these kinds of things like that, you know, we have to be able to deal with this in a more rigorous way than just simply saying that that's haram. We have to go beyond that. We have to have a deeper understanding of the needs of our time, and that is to provide convincing arguments for the rationality and necessity of tradition as it is. And by that, I would, by extension, al-marja'iyya as the kind of archetype or paradigmatic manifestation or example of tradition. And I'm not putting that in air quotes because I believe it to be something sacred. So as you can see, I'm not using air quotes for that because that would be a snide remark to make. I'm careful in that regard. I mean that in a real, true way, and to appreciate that tradition. And in order to do that, we need to, I think, focus on root causes as opposed to symptoms. Sometimes we focus a lot, by we, I mean the collective we, not me and not you, the collective we, focus a lot on what we see as the problems in the community, the symptoms of these, we focus on symptoms without getting to the kind of root of the problem. And I guess that's where it connects back to my academic writing as well, in the sense that if we don't understand the history of that idea, how we got here, we won't be able to deal with the symptom, right? With the cause itself. We have to go to the suburb and the cause of it, or at least the ratio legis, the precipitative cause, as we would say, right? The illah of it itself. And when we get to that, then we can start identifying, there's a foundational cleavage here between a godly approach and a materialistic approach. And that requires thinking. But then what we have to do is we have to be able to distill that in a way that is discernible and understandable for both children, young adults, and older adults. We have to distill that in a way, and I think one of the ways some people who are doing this very well are people like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and others from the Sunni community, who, for example, are putting Ghazali into a children version. Yes. We don't have anything like that. But obviously they've have invested millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions into these projects, and they're paying top scholars to work on this. They're not just finding somebody to work on it on a weekend. That requires a vision. And to that effect, the institute, inshallah, that we're starting in Toronto, I hope will be a foundation for that. Not that it's the only institute. There are institutes in the UK, such as the Shia Institute and others, but within a North American environment, I think it will serve, inshallah, in the coming years as a foundation for this work to occur within an academic environment with the search for haqq and truth at the front and the center. So not from a humanistic or atheistic kind of approach, not studying Islam as a human phenomenon, but as a truth itself, right? And beginning to look at issues in a deeper way. And then we need all kinds of experts to help distill that, synthesize that for the average person to understand. And that can be done through media, that can be done through books, that can be done through movies, that can be done through any multitude of ways. But that requires a very kind of deep vision of people that are devoted to knowledge, that believe that knowledge is essentially important. Now, this goes much beyond the majalis now. Much beyond the majalis.
Yeah, this becomes a social project.
This becomes a social project. And we will see the people that have always pushed social projects are always the intellectuals at the top. Look at someone like Foucault. Look at someone like, Foucault or Derrida or people like this, so-called fathers of postmodernism. As Charles Taylor points out very well in his Malaise of Modernity, as well as in The Secular Age to an extent in there, that what we take for granted today began with seeds planted by people like Michel Foucault and others. Or people like, who's the one who wrote on existentialism?
Sartre?
No, the other guy, what's his name, on existentialism. Anyways, now I'm not remembering. Their names are not important. The Kalam of Ahlul Bayt is more important for us to remember, the ulama of Ahlul Bayt, right? Yes. But anyhow, the people that wrote on existentialism, the people who wrote on these different issues, which then became derivatives of that in different ways, became the kind of commonplace thinking. We need to understand that link and how that link works, and we need to be visionaries in that regard, right? And this is where I think we are lacking. We are behind really behind the wheel here. I mean, not behind the wheel. We're not even in the car. Leave aside being behind the wheel. We're not even riding in the car. You know, we're having trouble just getting out of our cultural ghettos to deal with the real issues. I mean, we're so caught up with issues of asabiya and all kinds of tribal nonsense amongst ourselves that we don't see that the house is already on fire. And nor do we have the water or the fire hose or the firemen to treat it, because we don't even know where to start sometimes, because we're coming at it often from a post-colonial and inferior perspective. We see ourselves sometimes as unworthy of dealing with these issues. We see ourselves sometimes as being, oh, we can't deal with that. That's too luxurious. That's too much thinking. It's too philosophical for us, right? And if we remain in that way of thinking, I think we're going to have a very big problem, because we won't be able to develop the thinkers of the 21st century who have both a traditional background and an understanding of the issues that are going on in this continent. So we need more initiatives in that regard. Yeah, inshallah.
Shaykh Vinay, I will not take any more of your time. I think you've been, as I said, very, very generous with your time. So I will end by thanking you very much for your insights, your advice, for allowing us to see, I think, a glimpse of your erudite, academic, meticulous mind. Maybe this is what people will not usually be exposed to when you're on the pulpit or when they interact with you. But at least this gives us a platform to get into your mind. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you and to bless the work that you are doing, the projects that are forthcoming, the publications that are forthcoming. And inshallah, we will have other sittings where we can delve much deeper into many of the issues that we have barely scratched the surface in them in this quick sitting. And brothers and sisters, may God's peace and blessings be upon you all. And we thank Shaykh Vinay. Thank you so much.
Shukran jazeelan. Inshallah, jazakum Allahu khairan.
Thank you so much.
Fi aman Allah.